The Giants confirmed that Joey Bart is not just going to be handed a role on the opening day roster. David Villar is the odds-on favorite to be the starting third baseman for the Giants, and top prospect Marco Luciano sustained a stress fracture in his back in the offseason.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And spring training is officially here. Today is the official report date for pitchers and catchers. But as usual, they were there. A lot of them were there previously. And yesterday, Farhan Zaidi and Gabe Kapler met with the media. And so we got a lot of juicy nuggets out of that. And the first thing I want to discuss is that Kapler reiterated the point that we made just a few days ago, which, Susan Slusser has been all over this, and then Gabe Kapler made some comments at FanFest, and I think she read into them properly, and I think a lot of people kind of glossed over what he meant when he's talking about the catcher position, because those comments at FanFest were like, it is a true competition for the catcher spot, and I think a lot of people were like, oh, the backup spot, and it's Joey Bart, who's going to pair with Joey Bart? Well, Kapler could not have been more clear yesterday, saying that no, it's a true competition among these four guys: Bart, Rule 5 pick Blake Sabol, Roberto Pérez, and Austin Wynns for both spots. Typically you go with two catchers. You could go with three, and that could make some sense in a possible scenario if you're trying to keep Sabol on the roster, but you don't view him as one of the primary catchers. But it turns out they do. I mean, what the Giants said, what Kapler said, is that they're evaluating Blake Sabol as a catcher in camp, not as an outfielder, even though this is a guy who was an outfielder, then kind of learned to catch in professional baseball. But, he was a Rule 5 pick, not by the Giants, but by the Reds. And the way the Rule 5 draft works is you take guys, and then they've got to be on your major league team all season long, or else you have to offer them back to the team you picked them from. But for the Giants, they didn't even pick him. They went out and traded for him after the Reds picked him from the Pirates. And so clearly a guy that they wanted, I don't want to say badly, but, they went out of their way. It wasn't just like, oh, we have this pick and here's a guy we like the most, so let's just take him. It was more like, we really want this guy, so we're going to trade for him after the Reds had picked him. And so it's just, obviously worth reiterating that Kapler saying that Joey Bart is not just going to be handed playing time. And especially he was very clear saying, like, he just hasn't earned the right to be the slam dunk front runner number one catcher on this team. At this point in his career, he's had enough track record. It's not much. It's 132 career games. It's 408 career plate appearances. But in that time, you're talking about a strikeout rate last year of 38.5%, in the career 38%. And that's just really high. League average is in the low 20s, low to mid 20s, but last year it was lower 20s. When you take pitchers out, as a league, it went down a little bit, of course. And we're talking 222 batting average, 294 on base. That's the thing, is we're in a post batting average world, but you've got to get on base more than 29.4% of the time. And then the thing is, Bart obviously has this huge raw power in scouting terms. So like he's powerful and can hit the ball really far and really hard, but he doesn't get to the power enough. And so it's actually like below average power output. What we call game power has been below average because of all of the swing and miss and, chase issues that he had in 2020. To his credit, he made a big correction in 2022 and was much better at not chasing out of the strike zone. But it was like this trade-off that he couldn't find the proper balance with. He wasn't chasing, but he also wasn't making contact in the zone enough. And then so he started making more contact, and then the chasing went up. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just, the trade-offs were problematic. He wasn't able to not chase and make a lot of in-zone contact. And so I think it's the correct thing. Pedigree aside, I mean, he's got to go out there and earn it. I hope that he does. And basically, Kapler said he just needs to make more consistent contact. And I'm going to keep repeating this because I get comments like on Twitter all the time. Joey Bart finished so strong. What are you talking about? He did not. He had a good August. And then if you look at like the rolling 15 game strikeout rate, and early in the year it was up around 50%. And then he got sent down, and he got it for a period into the 20s and even low 20s for a little period. But if you look as September crept along and into October, the season went, early October, it went all the way back. He was back to striking out about 50% of the time, more than twice as often as the average hitter in the month of September. So it wasn't a strong finish. It was a strong month in the somewhat towards the end of the season, August basically, but September was rough. And Kapler even said that. He said, yeah, he had a period where he was doing well, but September was brutal. He was crystal clear about this. And so, yeah, I mean, but it's not like they have a bunch of great options. But I do like Roberto Pérez a lot. I mean, defensively. And if he's healthy, he's also a guy, if you look at the career splits, he's got above average numbers against lefties with a strikeout rate under 30%. And so for Bart, if you look at the career splits, it'd be one thing if he was crushing lefties but just really struggling against righties. But he's striking out, I think his career strikeout rate against lefties, the players he's supposed to have the platoon advantage against, over 40% of the time. So even more often than against righties. So look, I'm not giving up on Bart. He's 26 years old. He's only got one option year remaining. And so they can't do this forever. This would be like, assuming he gets optioned at some point this year, which I think is a somewhat safe assumption. Maybe not. I mean, if he just tears it up in spring and starts the year in the majors and does well, he may never be optioned again. But if there's any like sustained struggles, which I do anticipate given everything I'm saying here, he can be optioned this year, but that would be it. He wouldn't be able to be optioned next year. And so it's kind of like a important year for Joey Bart. They can't just do this forever. But Pérez, I think defensively, just leadership, throwing runners out, blocking, framing, leading pitchers, I think is probably going to make this roster. And then Sabol, as I've said, he has to make the roster or else be offered back. And Bart has that option. And so as much as I don't expect Blake Sabol to be like the primary catcher, because it might be a platoon there with Sabol as a lefty bat and Pérez as a righty bat. And like I said, Pérez holds his own against left-handed pitching historically. I agree that it's like kind of hard to imagine Blake Sabol as your like primary catcher, right? Because there's more right-handed pitchers and he's a left-handed batter. And so he would be playing more than Pérez, unless you just want Pérez to be in there primarily because of his great defense. But then what are you doing with Sabol if you're not playing him when he has the platoon advantage? So it's really interesting. That's why it's leading off our show, this battle. And then, of course, Austin Wynns, who did a nice job defensively and even a lot of contact, not a lot of power, but, kind of the inverse of Joey Bart a little bit in that, like I said, a lot of contact, doesn't have a lot of raw power even, but did a nice job defensively and was decent with the bat with the Giants last year. He's no longer on the 40-man, though. So that kind of gives him the outside track, I would say. Pérez isn't either, but I still think he has the inside track. Anyway, coming up in just a minute, David Villar. They clarified. We kind of already knew this, but we're going to talk about David Villar. Giants are calling him the presumptive starting third baseman in 2023. We'll talk about why in just a second. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and it's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. And for me, I'm currently looking at this upcoming All-Star game On Sunday, Team Giannis at plus 114, Team LeBron at minus 134. The point spread pretty narrow here, plus 2 for Team Giannis and minus 2 for Team LeBron. It's going to be a lot of fun. Make that no sweat first bet and check out the NBA All-Star Game. So don't miss your chance to get that no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, here we go. David Villar is the Giants' starting third baseman. What he did last year, and even previously in his minor league career, shouldn't go unnoticed. And when I say he's the starting third baseman, that kind of assumes he doesn't have a disastrous spring, I think. I'm also probably going to make this point dozens of times between now and when the season starts, but spring training stats are something to be really, really careful about. And we should not be reading into it's kind of the stats that are non-traditional and kind of under the hood that they're going to be paying attention to, as opposed to like, what's your spring batting average? I promise you that doesn't matter a lick. Kind of barely matters in the regular season what your batting average is. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Locked On MLB Prospects host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. Recently talked about the Giants prospects. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Speaking of prospects, like I said, Luciano with a back fracture. We're going to talk about that later. But David Villar, what's interesting about Villar is that a lot of the problems that I just discussed with Joey Bart, Villar had himself. But I think there are a couple of key differences. Number one, it's a smaller sample for Villar in the major leagues, in that he's only played 52 games, 181 plate appearances. That's kind of the equivalent of Joey Bart's 2020 season when he had 111 plate appearances. So yeah, I mean, Villar has a little more than that, but there's also just key differences where I think Villar existed kind of on the fringe of acceptable. And simply put, if you go past the fringe of acceptable, you're into unacceptable. And I think, unfortunately for Bart, like the strikeout rate being 38.5%, it's too high. But for Villar, 32% is the fringe of acceptable. Any higher, like if you start getting up to 35%, it's a big problem. But at 32, it's high, it's really high, but it's borderline. And so there's that. There's also the fact that Villar just walks more. I think it comes more naturally to him. I want to give Bart so much credit. Like when he first made his major league debut in that obviously extremely weird 2020 season, his chase rate was 43%, which is just too high. But last year, it was only 33.5%. And so he really did improve at kind of not chasing outside the strike zone. That means 43% of the time when a pitch was out of the zone, Bart swung at it, which is just too much. And for Villar last year, in his first major league cameo, his chase rate was 26.3%, which is better than average and good. And so it translated to a walk rate that was 9.9%. And so if you're going to strike out a lot and kind of have a low batting average, which Villar may be a guy who kind of sports lowish batting averages, but the walk rate being above average and the power, that's the thing too, is he got to more of his power. He hit 9 home runs in just 52 games, whereas Joey Bart has 11 career home runs in 132 games. And you might say Bart has more raw power. I think he does, but Villar maybe has more game power, the ability to hit for that, to get to it in games. And so those are a couple of things. And then also, I mean, that's kind of it when we talk about the similarities, but how Villar, like when we look at the contact rates, Villar is not much better. And the in-zone contact rate, both are around like 75%, I think, at contact on pitches in the strike zone when they swing. But so anyway, for Villar, I mean, he tore it up in AAA. And between AAA and the majors, he ended up hitting 36 home runs last year in like 136 games and only about 500 something plate appearances. So a ton of power. He like led the world in hitting. And when I say hitting, I don't mean batting average. I mean like a weighted runs created plus, all-encompassing offensive metric. He had a 148 weighted runs created plus, meaning 48% above average offense in AAA, league adjusted. And then in the previous year in AA, he was 41% above average offensively in a tough place to hit. In AAA, VR had a 15% walk rate last year. Just looking at Bart's last kind of full season in AAA, in 2021, his walk rate was 7.5%, literally half of David Villar's. And Bart's strikeout rate was 29.4%, whereas last year in AAA, like I said, double the walk rate for VR at 15%, and strikeout rate high, but more acceptable at 25.4%, because you're always going to project that that's going to go up when you go to the majors. So for Bart, his minor league AAA strikeout rate was already kind of high for major league levels. And so you predict, this is what we were saying last offseason, and it came true, right? That he had the 30% strikeout rate in AAA, and it came to the majors, and last year it was 38.5%. And so for VR, 25% strikeout rate in AAA, and comes to the majors, it's 32%. And so I think that's about as expected with these guys. But anyway, just kind of wanted to mention the 26-year-old VR is the presumptive kind of favorite to be the starting third baseman for the Giants. And I'm not sure it's going to work out, but he is a guy who finished strong. He got called up in July, started off well, like first game did well, and then kind of tailed off, a lot of swing and miss, etc. But then in the month of September, this guy just tore it up. If you look at the September numbers. And so he did finish strong. And I think that, if it doesn't work out, they don't have the greatest options behind him, but they do have capable players like J.D. Davis and Wilmer Flores figure to be, on the opening day roster, and they can play third. Not great defensively, and that's where I have some concerns. But you've also got a guy like Casey Schmidt in AAA. And so I think you've got like 4 layers there where somebody somewhere will probably grab a hold of that role. And I kind of like the probability of that. And so I feel pretty good about going into the season with that. I think it's worth it for a team in the Giants' position to give a guy like this an opportunity. You want younger, here you go. And that's the thing, is a lot of guys have to prove it. Before they're someone, they're no one. And VR was never a top prospect, but guys like this are worth giving an opportunity to. And it took them too long. I'm going to be clear about this. Last year, we don't really know why it took them so long to give him a shot. And he only came up in early July. But I don't know. I just thought they should have called him up sooner. He was tearing it up, and the Giants had some problems. I forget who was kind of seeing most of the time there. I mean, Longoria, obviously. But this team needed an infusion of youth and upside, and we saw it last year. I mean, when all was said and done, just by the way, VR's slash line, he hit 231, which is a little below average. I always say this, league average batting average is like 240. And so if you're expecting only 300 is good, then that's impossible standards in today's game. 240 is normal, so he was at 231, so it's a little worse than average. But the on base of 331, significantly better than average, thanks to that walk rate I was talking about. And then the power, a 455 slugging, and a healthy difference between the slugging and the batting average of 224, which is called the ISO, isolated power. So above average on base, above average slugging. So overall, a 124 weighted runs created plus in the major leagues. Defensively, I don't know. I haven't scouted him extensively, but they seem to believe he can be a pretty solid, if not somewhat good defender there. And so it's a big unknown, but it's a worthwhile roll of the dice here, or just kind of opportunity to give to David VR, and hopefully he can just have a big spring and prove that he's kind of shored up his weaknesses and become a good major league player. And we're going to find that out in 2023 if he can do that. So coming up in just a minute, injury updates. An unfortunate thing every year at this time when teams report and we start getting medical updates for the first time. Marco Luciano, the Giants' arguably top position player prospect, fractured his back in the offseason. And so we're going to get into that and other injury updates in just a second. But before we do, all right, as promised, injury updates. Marco Luciano, the Giants' top position player prospect. I mean, Casey Schmidt is up there, but Luciano for a long time. I mean, he's got the upside of, stardom, and still very young. I think he's just 21 years old still. But yeah, he sustained a low back stress fracture in the Dominican Republic while playing winter ball. So that occurred a while ago. That was in November? It was a while ago. And so here's what the Giants say. He is slowly ramping up baseball activity and is currently working on his throwing and hitting progression. But there's no way around it. This is a bad thing. And Luciano missed a bunch of time in the minors during the regular minor league season with a low back strain. And so to have it become a low back stress fracture, basically Zaidi called it an aggravation of the previous injury. It wasn't like a separate deal. And so they're saying it's not chronic, and their doctors aren't worried about it becoming some kind of a chronic issue, but at the same time, it's not what you want to see. You want to see health and you want to see performance. And for the last couple years with Luciano, it's kind of been not quite what you want to see. And so we probably won't see him for a lot of spring training, but they do anticipate he'll be ready to go for the minor league season. And so we can just keep our fingers crossed and hope that that happens and that this never resurfaces, but no guarantees. And that's the unfortunate reality of dealing with human beings who have bodies that break down from time to time. But he's an important part of the future. And so, this is going to be a huge storyline to watch in 2023. Can Luciano have a good, healthy season? If so, fantastic. If not, it kind of sets them back in some key ways. Other injury updates: Michael Conforto, right shoulder rehab, participating in full baseball activity, but will be limited. He's going to start spring games as the DH and will work his way back to playing the outfield as his throwing progresses. He's currently throwing to 165 feet, which is pretty far. I mean, 165 feet, you're not doing that with some kind of bum shoulder. You're doing it as you're progressing back from, they're just being careful. Conforto says he feels like almost 100%. And I just think there's no reason for the Giants to push him at all in this regard. And so I'm not really concerned about this. This just strikes me as kind of a normal ramp up coming off of shoulder surgery, which was like almost a year ago at this point. And so I think he's going to be fine. Cole Waits, who I just guessed would make the opening day bullpen, they say he has a right lat dorsey strain. Suffered 10 days ago while throwing a bullpen session at home. He's going to be evaluated by Dr. Ken Akazuki today, so yesterday, I guess, and he's currently not throwing. So that is a bad kind of setback for Cole Waits, who figured to have a good shot of making this bullpen, or at least a decent shot. But, this will probably hold him back, and I would now anticipate he probably will not be on that opening day bullpen. But, of course, he's young and can let this heal up, and he'll have his opportunities down the road. And lastly, Luke Jackson, free agent reliever the Giants signed this offseason, who's coming off Tommy John surgery. And we've always kind of heard that he's going to possibly start the season on the 60-day IL, which would set him up to debut like 2 months into the season. Giants say he threw his first mound session yesterday here in Scottsdale and threw 25 pitches. So, again, normal process for a guy at this stage in his recovery. And those are the updates. But the big one there being Luciano, we did not know it was a fracture. Kind of annoying that they wait until, now to reveal that it was a fracture. Although, I don't know. I mean, they don't have any benefit of revealing that one of their top prospects has kind of been injured. I don't know. I just don't love that. Why not just, I would like to know these things when they happen, not months after they happen. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Locked On MLB Prospects host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot. So thanks in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. We'll have the latest from spring training, also some mailbag questions possibly as well. So thanks again for listening today. You are now Locked On Giants.